Okay, this is the third lecture on poverty and inequality. We left off after we learned about the $1.25 purchasing power parity poverty line, which seems to be pretty consistent across country lines. The question is, how many people are below that line? The simplest way to determine how many are below the poverty line in the country is just to do a head count. I mean, it's just to identify them and say, well, we've got, 300,000 below that line. Just report the number. That's an R. Okay? Report the number below that line. Okay. Or we can do a head count index. This is the ratio of the number below the poverty line to the total population. So let's put an equal sign on this one. And so the simplest way, I'm going to put a box around one of them, and then this other one is another way. It's not as simple, but it's accepted as an official statistic. And often when we look up countries in poverty, we'll find the head count index. So this is an important thing to know. The number below poverty line divided by total population in that country. So that can give you an idea of how poor the country is by the percentage that are below the poverty line. There's a third measure called the poverty gap, which measures the severity of the poverty. And so we're going to have to move on to the next next one here. So a third measure, poverty gap. So this is number 3, okay? This describes the severity of poverty. Not just how many fall below the poverty line, but how far below they fall, okay? Let me change that, and let's just put this down here. So the poverty gap, I'm just going to write PG, equals, and I'm going to put the symbols up and then I'll tell you what they mean, okay? So that I don't make a mistake on my formula. Okay. I'll talk about it after I get this out. Where the PL equals the poverty line. MC equals the mean consumption. Gonna run out of space. It's consumption. I just ran out of space. Although it may let me write. Oh, it lets me write beyond the. Well, okay. Mean consumption per capita for those below poverty line. Okay. H equals the head count index, which we just talked about. Okay. And the head count index, as we talked about before, 2 slides over here. Oh, come on, give me the background. Oh, great. It's not letting me go back. I took a picture of something I want to talk to you about later, and apparently it's going to use that as the background on this. Let's see. No, it's not going to do it. Okay. Head count index. That's just the number below the poverty line divided by the population, which I had already shown you. Now let's go back to this up here. So you've got the poverty line. At the poverty line minus the mean consumption per capita. Now what that means is, if the poverty line is, say, $1.25, and in your country the mean is 75 cents, you're going to subtract the difference, and then you're going to divide that by the poverty line, and you're going to get a ratio of just basically how bad that is, you know, compared to the poverty line. So, you know, so if $1.25 minus 75 cents is 50 cents, right? So then you divide that by $1.25, and then you can find out what the average person is earning as a percentage of poverty. And then multiply that times the head count index. And that's called the poverty gap. So we have these 3 basic ways that we can actually measure the depth of poverty. And poverty gap is the most important. Okay, so I want to find this one, but I wanted to talk to you about this other thing here. And I've got writing all over this now, so let's see if I can just do a big erasure. I want to show you this picture. I don't know why it did that. I had taken a picture and then assigned it to be the second one, but when I went to the second one, I had to skip it and go to the third one. Well, I had the blackboard, then I had the picture, and then I went to the third blackboard page to use as my second writing, and somehow that confused it. So when I went backwards to number one was the picture. So this picture is very big. This is a very important thing I wanted to show you. Had a little screw up here with where it showed it to you, but this is it. Looks like it's slightly out of focus, but notice that on one side, on the x-axis, we have average annual growth in per capita income, and on the other, we have average annual growth in per capita income by quintile. Let me find this here. Average annual growth in per capita income for the poorest quintile. I knew that wasn't right, and I couldn't read it on the screen. Okay, so over here, let's pull up a color here that I can write with. Okay, per poorest quintile. Okay, and that's a P. Per poorest quintile. Okay, so over here, this is the average. This is per capita income, and on this side, this is for the poorest quintile. So this is about a test of is growth good for the poor, because there has been in economics and in political public choice circles a belief that somehow economic growth goes off and leaves the poor. And nobody had really done an effective job of testing it until David Dollar and Art Cray in 2002. And now I received my PhD long before that. And so that was part of my upbringing, was that, you know, you have to be careful not to leave the poor behind when there's economic growth, blah, 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 blah. And it's turned out that that's not true. So this is very big, this graph here. This graph basically shows that when growth in per capita income increases this direction, the poorest quintile also go with it. So the poorest quintile is moving this direction, because, can you see it? So in other words, basically, it's finally been tested, and economic growth is good for the poor. So basically on that chart, I was trying to draw on the picture and it was trouble. Basically, this is the growth for the absolute poorest. And this is just growth per capita. Okay, so this is growth in income per capita for everybody. And basically, the poorest are getting wealthier faster, basically, as we're moving this direction. And so that study has really revolutionized how we view economic growth. I mean, I've talked to you about the pie. You know, as the population gets bigger, we have to slice the pie into more and more slices, and so the only way we can keep even is if the pie itself grows. So economic growth is essential if you have population growth. But this study shows that the poor are included in the increase in income caused by economic growth. It was a very important study. And it was Dollar and Cray were the people that did that. Dollar and Cray. Social safety nets. The safety net is not exactly the same thing as the conditional cash transfers. Conditional cash transfers are useful. But what about people who just have a temporary fall into poverty? That's a C. Social safety nets. In many countries, and including the USA, the majority of those in poverty will not be in poverty at the next census 10 years later. There's really a very small proportion of the impoverished who are there for life. Of course, a lot of people, you know, we talk about, oh, the poor. Well, a small proportion of the poor are permanent poor. A lot of the poor are there temporarily and could use a safety net in which you help them to get out of poverty and it is not a permanent issue. So, saying that it's temporary does not minimize the hardship families endure, nor does it imply that those living on amounts just over the nation's poverty line are satisfying their material needs. But it does recommend designing policies that help individuals and households when income and consumption shortfalls occur, but not in a permanent fashion. An example of this, a really good example of one that has been seen to work, is in a province of India. So let me write this out. Okay. This is the Indian state of Maharashtra. Okay. And it's called Employment Guarantee Scheme, EGS. Employment Guarantee Scheme. Okay. And there's another one, also in Argentina, that has scientists, I wouldn't say applauding, but saying, hey, here's a good example. And that's called the Trebajar. Actually, it's Trabajar, isn't it? Trabajar. So let's talk about let's start with EGS. The EGS in India guarantees employment within a few weeks of the individual's request and provides a job relatively close to the person's home. So it's not much effort to go to work. You also are working around people who expect to see you working. So it's in your neighborhood or a few blocks from home. These jobs involve public works, such as road construction and repair, irrigation systems, and prevention of soil erosion. To solve the targeting problem, wages in public employment schemes must be kept low relative to market alternatives. So in other words, if you get a better offer, you take it because it pays more. So you make less working for the government, but at least you are, it's helping you through a bad time. Okay? Okay, I accidentally hit pause, and I think I've missed some of the lecture. I've just been talking for a while, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this one right here and listen to how far it went, and then start up where I left off on a second video, okay?